So, Jamie, I pulled you in because there is a little boy called Bear who's not even 10 years old yet. And the article that was recently released about a celebrity death shows that there's a very good chance he's going to pay in excess of £9 million in tax because of his father's death. And the person we're talking about, horrible story that obviously, I think it was last year, Liam Payne from One Direction and passed away. But he's got a huge estate, as you would imagine, because of, you know, his status, and he didn't have a will. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about that and what it means, because I think it will give parents out there, people out there, a really good insight to what actually happens when you do die and you don't have a will. So first of all, let's just break that down into layman's terms. What is it called, and what does it kind of mean in its fundamentals?
Essentially, if you die without a will, you die intestate. And if you die intestate, there's something called the laws of intestacy that basically says this is what happens. Mm-hmm. Now, what's really interesting is, it's not really interesting, but...
probably is to you. It's your industry.
Without a will, because he wasn't married, any of his assets that were in his sole name passed directly to his child or children. Now, for what we know about him, I think he had a partner and potentially they were going to get married. She isn't due anything. She wouldn't get anything under the laws of intestacy. And so therefore everything goes to the son. Now, as you mentioned, son's not even 10. Under laws of intestacy, Bear will inherit at 18.
Okay.
Now, I sometimes question, certainly when talking to clients that have modest estates of £1 million, maybe less, is it right for your child to inherit that sort of money, have that responsibility to potentially look at the rest of their lives in that pot of money at the age of 18?
Well, I guess so what you're saying is, so Liam Payne's son is going to inherit that lump sum of money at 18, but what's he going to do when he's 14, 15, knowing that in 3 or 4 years' time he could be getting 12, 13, 14 million pounds in his bank account, or will be?
Yeah.
Psychologically, that's going to be quite difficult stress at that age to kind of comprehend, I would have thought.
I know lots of people, and you might feel the same as me, but I want to provide for my kids. I want to do everything I possibly can, but I don't want them to be spoon-fed. I want them to have that hard work attitude. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting that in this case his son won't, but you're absolutely correct. If I was 15 and due to sit exams, and I know that regardless of what happens in those exams, in 3 years' time I'm going to have a lot of money, am I going to be motivated to do well? I think most importantly, if we look at our lives, our parents guide us through everything. When we're 18, they guide us on what we need to do. They guide us on whether that be buying a property, buying our first car, and ultimately, because all of that money is going to be his at 18, he can do whatever he wants. Mm-hmm. And I actually think that's really dangerous, not specifically for him, but for any child inheriting a large sum of money at 18.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic to cover, and sort of shifting it slightly from that. The article that we can put in this post if we need to, but it says that Liam was worth about 28.5 million gross, which after debt and some finance and stuff like that comes to 23.3 million net. The bit that sort of we need to talk about from an estate planning perspective is the fact that there is going to be over £9 million worth of tax to pay on that. But not necessarily, if there was the right planning from Liam, would that needed to have been paid? Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, anybody, but certainly him, possibly didn't plan on dying. I'm not sure anybody necessarily does. But if just a will where potentially X amount of his estate was left to a charity would have reduced that potential inheritance tax liability. He could have potentially worked with some kind of advisor on, okay, I've got this liability, how can I protect my child or children from having that through some kind of insurance policy. Obviously, we spoke about he had a relationship. If he'd have got married, potentially some planning there could have meant no tax or very limited, certainly whatever he passed to his spouse. But yeah, I guess the question on on most people's lips when we see an article like this is, how does somebody that famous die without a will?
Mm.
And I think there's only two options. Option number one, all of the key people of influence that he had around him, so whether that be advisors, accountants, mortgage brokers, agents, those people just purely didn't care about advising him to have a will, and actually potentially they weren't going to benefit from that, so why advise him to have that? Or those people did tell him to have that, and actually he didn't see it as important, or just thought, you know what, yeah, I'll get round to doing that. And we'll never know.
Do you think that's like, let's go away from a £24 million estate and one of the most famous guys out of a boy band, bring it back to normal life? Do you think that's a big reason why over 60% of people in the UK don't have a valid will? Is they just think, oh, I'll get round to doing it?
No, I believe it's the first one, actually.
Okay.
I actually believe that a lot of people that do what they do for money. And so for some people, if there's nothing in it for them, potentially there's no reason for them to advise them. Now, you pick on this case. If somebody would have said to him, I need you to do this, it's going to take X amount of time, it's going to cost X amount, but you're doing it for your son. Okay. Not many people are going to turn around and say, I won't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly as the cost is negligible, as you've already mentioned. That's my personal opinion. I think the people that, and it's not just him, you see people all the time, don't you, die without a will. So
you said earlier that Liam Payne wasn't married, has a son. What would be the difference, let's say, if him and Cheryl got married and they were happily together, and obviously they had the son together, which they did? How would that have looked differently if that was the case? If he was married to someone, it doesn't necessarily need to be Cheryl, but I can't remember the girl's name that he was going out with, so I said her.
I have no idea either, actually. But same things apply. So in this scenario, he's still worth £28 million. He still died without a will, so he still died intestate. In that scenario, the laws of intestacy would have dealt with things differently, and what they would have said is the first £322,000 in his name goes to his spouse, and the remainder of his estate would go 50% to spouse, 50% to any children. There are some other things such as jointly owned assets go to spouse, personal possessions go to spouse. Now the crucial thing here is that anything going to spouse is exempt from inheritance tax. Doesn't matter whether you're worth £5 or £5 million. Mm-hmm. So yeah, certainly if he was married, the tax bill would be a lot lower in that scenario.
Yeah, you would have calculated it probably more like half of what's due to pay.
Yeah,
based on that. So that's quite an interesting metric. So a lot of people probably aren't aware of that. And that's, again, because there wasn't a will in place. If there was a will in place, can you dictate what happens with that estate and that assets? Could you say, actually, I don't want my son to inherit all of that at this stage, so I want it to go to my spouse, I want it to go to my wife in this case, because it's a more tax efficient way of doing it, but also it's probably a safer way of putting that money with an adult.
Yeah, let's park the conversation around tax for a moment. We've both got kids. Our kids are similar age. If something happened to you and your wife, or me and my wife, and our children were to inherit, I couldn't think of anything worse of the kids as they are right now. My eldest child won't even go to the toilet. If we're in a restaurant, won't even go to the toilet on his own. So the thought of him in 7 years' time having X amount of money in a bank account that he's solely responsible for scares the living daylights out of me. And it's not just that. We live in a world now as well where people are vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I mean, of course, you'd like to think, certainly you mentioned Cheryl earlier, but in this scenario, Bear will have people around him, advising him, of course. But if our children don't have that, what's to stop our children from inheriting our wealth, getting married to somebody who maybe has got an agenda that's not the right agenda, and losing some of that wealth?
Because in this case, what we're talking about is a parent passing away. So then you're not there to be the guidance. So you have to kind of put the planning in right at the beginning.
Yeah.
But that's the real issue, is you don't have a parent because in this sort of, what we're looking at here in foresight is that the parent is potentially going to die, or if it was me writing my will, if I was to, it's an if I was to, that you've got a backup plan for your kids so that you feel comfortable that you could do that. So could you stipulate, for example, through a way of estate planning that actually my 2 daughters, you've got 2 sons, but I would not want them to inherit my estate until they turned a certain age? Can you put that stipulation in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And of course, certainly if they're minors today, or you want them to inherit at a later age, you then need to consider trustees. So who do you trust to be responsible for making those decisions whilst the children are not of that age? And a really good point here to talk about is if you are, let's say, an individual watching this, you're not married and you've got a child, and you want everything of yours to go to a child, and we've just told you, without a will, everything of yours goes to a child. Does that mean you don't need a will? I'm going to say no. Okay, and I'm going to give my example why. If I said to you, I'm going to send you on an all-inclusive trip to Australia, I'm going to give you 2 choices as to how you can get there. Option number 1, I'm going to send you first class, in fact, business class, on a flight.
Yeah.
Okay. Option number 2, you got to swim. Okay, which option do you want to choose to go on your all-inclusive trip to Australia?
I've got a bad shoulder, so I'm taking the flight.
Okay. Now, it's not quite as bad, but that's the example I would give.
Yeah.
Whether you swim to Australia or whether you get a first-class flight to Australia, you're still going to get to Australia. Your child is still going to inherit. But it's not going to be as easy as potentially having a will in place where a relevant person is appointed to be an executor of that estate versus somebody having to apply. Being able to apply to the probate court rather than having to apply for what's called letters of administration, it's just an easier process. So whatever you're doing, don't look at this article and think, without a will, my child will inherit. Yes, but is that the right thing to do? Not in all cases.
I guess also you're leaving that situation in the hands of the law, which the law is not always set in stone, right? There is a case that could change in 10 years' time. There could be a slight stipulation change in 10 years' time, which means what you thought you knew was going to be okay might not be. Mm-hmm. But also you're not in control ultimately, are you? You can, the way I see a will is me putting my wishes to what I want to happen to my hard earnings effectively.
I mean, let's look at a celebrity case where tax planning / trust planning was really, really effective. Now, it's a very, very different case because obviously, as far as we're aware as the public, Liam Payne had no idea he was going to pass away. Mm-hmm. So effectively, potentially, no planning was done. But if we look back at, I want to say 2008, around that time, I think Jade Goody passed away. And she had, I believe, a £4 million fortune. And her children, who are now both adult, I believe, are both benefiting from her estate tax-free. And the planning that was put in place there was essentially she got married to somebody who potentially some people say she didn't necessarily like, but there was a trust utilised that meant assets passed to him, assets then went to children, and there was no tax paid. Mm-hmm. Now, if the same scenario occurred on a £4 million estate and she wasn't married and assets were going to kids, there could have been a tax bill of 40% above £325,000. Now, 40% above £325,000, you're looking at nearly £1.6 million that was saved from some really good planning. Mm-hmm. So that just shows that the importance of planning that can be done. It's
not about trying to avoid tax here. It's about you've worked really hard as a parent. Typically speaking, you want that money to go to your children or where you want it to go to. Yeah. And you want as much of it as possible to go there. So it's not tax avoiding, it's planning through the letter of the law to ensure that your hard-earned money that you've already paid all the tax on anyway, let's be honest, in multiple different ways as well, goes directly to your kids in the most tax-efficient way because you've worked for it and that's what you deserve to have if you planned efficiently.
The amount of people that are in retirement, whether they're in 50s, 60s, 70s, and they've already started gifting money to their children, purely because they want to reduce the size of their estate. They want their children to benefit from their assets now, and a lot of that is driven by, like you say, it's not tax avoidance, it's tax planning.
Yeah, that's why people pay money for a tax planner, for an estate planner, to talk to people like you that have got expertise in this area of the field, to go, what's the most efficient way to get to this path, to get to Australia in business class so that my kids don't have to swim there. That's the best way of effectively doing
swim there, there's sharks.
No, really interesting. It's interesting to see the article. It's scary when you see the article, but that's why we wanted to do this video, because it gives people a point of reference when they know someone, which, you know, in the public eye, and there's multiple other cases, isn't there, where this happened. I think Amy Winehouse, she was one as well that passed away without a will, and there's been other celebrities as well which kind of show it at a certain level, which, you know, it's a shame that it gets to that point, but it's why it's really important to, regardless of age, have conversations with your estate planners, with people like yourself at Soteria, get that will in place, and then unfold in the next layers of whatever it needs to be, because it's the adult thing to do for your kids ultimately. It's kind of, I've said it before on camera, I say it again, I'm not in this industry. I think it's quite selfish of parents if they don't go and shell out that money to get that plan in place, personally. So yeah, thanks for sharing your expertise, Jamie.
No problem at all. Thank you.